In July 1952, South Korea stood in the devastating and bloody grip of war. Although Seoul had been narrowly reclaimed, the front lines were just miles away. Under the constant dread of renewed bombardment, millions of refugees remained crammed into the hills, and shantytowns of the temporary capital, Busan, struggling daily to survive. Hearing the cries of children leaking through torn tents, I wonder what kind of hope people could even dare to dream back then. Amidst the ruins of this nation that felt like a massive graveyard, an official invitation to the Helsinki Olympics arrived from Finland. The world looked on with cold skepticism, scoffing at how a nation without even rice to eat could compete. The national treasury was utterly bankrupt. There was not a single cent of the $100,000 needed. If I had been in their shoes, my mind would have gone blank, and I might have just sat down and wept in despair. Yet they refused to surrender. The committee and the citizens took to the streets. Impoverished refugees, barely surviving on one meal a day, trembled as they spent their last few cents on Olympic fund coupons. Thinking of the desperate longing held within those faded pieces of paper, my heart still breaks, and tears well up in my eyes. With funds raised from the tears and blood of the people, Korea formed a tiny, humble delegation of just 43 members, the smallest in its history. Lacking proper shoes and even a full meal, athletes trained relentlessly on the jagged dirt of Busan until their toes bled and burst. What went through their minds every time they collapsed from exhaustion? They must have known, better than anyone, that what they carried was not just a ball, but the very fate of their fallen homeland. To prove to the world that Korea was still alive and that its heart was still beating fiercely, these warriors risked everything. Leaving the port of Busan for a grueling one-week journey across the globe, their emotional and historic trek begins now. It was the night of July 3, 1952, at the chilly Pier of Busan, the temporary wartime capital. Holding the precious funds raised through the blood and tears of their citizens, 43 South Korean athletes boarded a ferry bound for Japan. The war-torn nation was too poor to buy even a single plane ticket to Tokyo, leaving them with no choice but to face the treacherous night sea. Lying tightly together on the cold, dark floor of the cabin, the athletes spent the entire night battling severe seasickness, vomiting helplessly. If I had been trapped in that dark cabin, carrying the heavy fate of my country while throwing up in agony, I would have wept quietly in the dark out of sheer sorrow. But this was merely a gentle beginning to the brutal ordeal that lay ahead. The following morning on July 4th, the ship finally arrived at Shimonoseki port. But what blocked the path of our athletes was the freezing contempt of the Japanese authorities. For 2 agonizing days, they flatly refused entry, citing the lack of entry visas. Since the nation was at war and held no diplomatic relations with Japan, the authorities completely banned the athletes from even stepping off the ship. Unable to set foot on the soil they could see right in front of them, the warriors remained trapped inside the docked ferry, watching the agonizing diplomatic battle unfold in total helplessness. If I had been standing in their place, enduring the arrogant stares of those foreign officials, my heart would have broken into pieces from the bitter reality of my powerless homeland. Only after desperate, round-the-clock negotiations did they barely receive a conditional pass to disembark and catch a train to Tokyo. On July 6th, after rushing to Haneda airport, the team finally boarded an Air France propeller plane. However, the heavens would not grant them an easy path. Barely an hour after takeoff, a deafening roar shook the aircraft violently due to an engine failure. The plane turned back, making a tense emergency landing right back at Tokyo Haneda Airport. Clinging to the rattling walls of the cabin, the athletes prayed through the terrifying fear of death. When the tires hit the Haneda runway again, the crushing weight of their despair must have been unimaginable. If I had been sitting in that cabin, wondering if everything was over before it even began, I would have wanted to give up and break down in tears. Yet they refused to yield, and they climbed right back onto the repaired plane, passing through Taipei and Bangkok, fiercely determined to reach their destination. The plane pushed forward into the harsh, turbulent desert air currents of Western Asia, passing through Calcutta on July 7th. Trapped in their narrow seats, the athletes felt their legs and hips grow numb with severe swelling, deprived of proper food and sleep for days. Then on July 9th, while flying over Karachi, Pakistan, a sudden, loud explosion ripped through the air, and fire erupted from the wing. Watching the engine burn fiercely against the pitch-black desert sky, the athletes realized death was staring them in the face. The aircraft made a sharp turn, initiating an agonizing emergency flight back to Karachi airport. As the plane violently rocked from the combined force of the raging fire and severe turbulence, the athletes closed their eyes, bracing for a fatal crash. Just thinking about the absolute terror they endured makes my skin crawl and tears pour from my eyes. Though they miraculously made a crash landing at the desert airport of Karachi, the shattered engine left them completely stranded there for 2 whole days. With no money to afford a hotel, the athletes had to camp outside, sitting directly on the bare dirt under a crude makeshift tent right next to the runway. In the scorching desert heat of over 40 degrees Celsius, choked by the dry, blinding sandstorms, they slept on the ground like discarded cargo, watching the agonizing hours tick away. If I had been lying on that harsh desert ground, rationing every single drop of water to soothe my burning throat, I would have wailed out loud at the tragic reality of my nation. Yet, in that punishing heat, the athletes massaged each other's severely swollen legs and comforted one another with their eyes, murmuring a desperate vow that they must survive, and they must show the world what Korea is made of. After 2 long days, the repaired plane finally took off again on July 11th, carrying the warriors through Cairo, Egypt, and toward the European continent. By the time they passed Rome, Paris, and Hamburg, the athletes looked like refugees. Their single set of uniforms was heavily stained with sweat and dust, and their feet were too swollen to fit into their shoes. Westerners at Paris airport cast looks of deep pity at them, but our athletes proudly straightened their backs and held their heads high. Even though their bodies were completely broken, they held on to the flag of the Republic of Korea, keeping it close to their chests. If I had witnessed that humble yet magnificent sight with my own eyes, I would have been choked with overwhelming reverence and wept openly. They were no longer just national athletes, they were the final shred of pride for a surviving nation. It took 10 days and 9 nights of pure agony since leaving Busan port, but finally, on July 12th, the wheels touched down on the soil of Helsinki, greeted by the cool, refreshing northern European breeze. The moment the cabin door opened, the athletes burst into tears, locking each other in a fierce, emotional embrace. They had overcome the humiliation at the Pier, the terrifying turnback at Haneda, the fire over the Karachi desert, and 2 days of brutal homelessness on the sand. Driven entirely by an unyielding spirit, these 43 South Korean warriors had survived against all odds. Their tearful, monumental journey was finally over, and the real miracle that would stun the world was about to begin right here in Helsinki. On July 12, 1952, 43 exhausted souls finally set foot in Helsinki, but there was no time for them to rest their broken bodies. The opening ceremony was only days away, and while other nations trained in state-of-the-art facilities with warm meals, the South Korean athletes had to quickly recover and prepare on barren fields, wearing their ragged, sweat-stained uniforms. Every single day, their hearts were heavy with agonizing anxiety as they waited for the latest letters from home, wondering if their families had survived another day of brutal bombing. If I had been standing on that foreign track, knowing that my homeland was actively burning and my loved ones were dodging mortar shells, the sheer weight of the psychological torture would have broken my spirit completely. Yet, whenever they felt like collapsing from hunger and exhaustion, they looked at the taegukgi pinned to their chests and reminded themselves that they were the last remaining hope for a dying nation. The historic moment finally arrived on July 19th, as the delegation marched into the packed Olympic Stadium during the opening ceremony. The global crowd, which had only ever seen Korea associated with blood, ashes, and news of war, fell into a collective hush as the tiny team walked past. Holding their heads high, our warriors marched with a fierce, quiet dignity that demanded respect from the world. Watching that tiny group of athletes marching proudly under the gaze of a sympathetic yet stunned global audience, I would have been overwhelmed with a profound sense of pride, and tears of sorrow would have turned into tears of pure defiance. They were showing the world that despite the relentless attempts to erase their nation from the map, Korea was still very much alive and unyielding. Then the true miracles began on the field of battle, carved out of nothing but sheer desperation and blood. On July 27th, weightlifter Kim Sung-jip summoned a superhuman strength born of pure patriotism, lifting a total of 382.5 kilograms to capture the bronze medal. Just a few days later, on August the 2nd, boxer Kang Jun-ho fought through broken skin and severe exhaustion, taking every blow as if defending the front lines of his country, until the final bell secured another priceless bronze medal. With these 2 historic bronze medals, South Korea left an indelible mark on the world, achieving an astonishing tied 37th place overall despite the ruins of war. To the rest of the world, it was just a statistic on a scoreboard. But to the people huddled in the shanty towns of Busan and the ruins of Seoul, those medals were a blinding light in the darkest night. If I could have witnessed the exact moment those 2 medals were secured, I would have broken down and wailed in tears, knowing that those pieces of metal were forged from the literal blood and sweat of an entire populace. These 43 warriors proved to the world that the sovereign spirit of the Korean people could never, ever be conquered. Their tearful crusade in Helsinki was over, but this unyielding spirit led to another reckless challenge, the 1954 World Cup in Switzerland, carrying written wills and vowing to throw themselves into the ocean if they lost. The historic and tearful journey of the football team begins in the next episode.